Hello, hello, hello. Another Midnight Rose special. This is about something that interests me. Of course, there's plenty of missing people's cases. This one kind of delves a little bit more into the possibility of, do they slip into another dimension, another timeline? Or do they just wander off? Or you never know. Some of these cases are a little bit, let's say, more on the stranger side. There's when I was doing all of this and looking all this stuff up, and I've been doing it here and there for about a week now, it's really sad to think how many people go missing all the time. Most of them most likely are murdered, or elements have got them or whatever, but here's a few cases of missing people. This first one, and I'm sure you've heard of probably a lot of these cases. This first one was Owen Parfitt, who lived in the English town of Shepton Mallet and mysteriously disappeared in the 1760s, so a long time ago. Parfitt was unable to walk on his own due to a disease. So he lived with his sister, who helped to take care of him and would help him move around the house. One day, Parfitt was sitting outside right of his front door, where he usually sat, on the front porch. And when his sister came over to move him in the chair, the only thing that she found of her beloved brother was the coat that he had covered himself with to keep warm. Now, you got to take in consideration, this guy can't move himself. She thought perhaps the neighbor had moved him inside the house, but when she looked, he was nowhere to be found. And the neighbor said that they never had moved him. And no one has seen him since. They never saw him again, and he was unable to walk on his own. So we can only assume, maybe, that Owen Parfitt was sucked into another dimension while he was sitting in his chair. Maybe. But it is strange. And here's another one, Brian Schaefer, a young man there. Brian Schaefer was a medical student at Ohio State University. He disappeared April of 2006. He met up with a few of his friends one night at a bar, and he was last seen around 2 a.m. when witnesses saw him talking with two women at the bar. Nothing so far strange about that. Sometime after that, Schaefer's friends lost track of him. They realized that he was no longer at the bar, and so they left him thinking that he had just gone home. But he never made it home. In fact, he seemed to have just vanished and never be seen again. The strangest part of the story is that this particular bar had security cameras at the entrance. The police found footage of Schaefer entering the bar, but there was no footage of him ever leaving the bar. And they found no evidence of foul play. Now, I don't know if that bar had a back door somewhere, or, somebody got him, and took him to somewhere and hid him, and waited for people to leave. I don't know. But awfully strange. Louis Le Prince, this is another strange one. Louis Le Prince was the inventor of the motion picture, though Thomas Edison would take credit for the invention after Le Prince disappeared. And was a patent-greedy Edison responsible? I don't think so. Probably not. Le Prince mysteriously disappeared in September of 1890. He had been visiting his brother in Dijon, France, hopefully I'm saying that right, and boarded a train to go back to Paris. When the train arrived in Paris, he did not get off the train. The train made no stops in between Dijon and Paris, and Le Prince could not have jumped out the window of his compartment, since the windows were locked from the inside. The police searched the countryside between Dijon and Paris anyway, but they never found any sign of him. He just vanished. Now, is there a possibility that Le Prince never boarded the train? Maybe. Le Prince's brother, Albert, was the one who took him to the train station. Is it feasible that Albert could have been lying and he actually slew his own brother for his inheritance money? But at this point, we'll likely never know. I would think that somebody would have been able to see him on the train, but, back in 1890, did they really pay attention to that? Was it all a cover-up? We'll never know. Could have been a cover-up. Maybe someone wanted Thomas Edison to be the guy. So even if Thomas Edison didn't do it himself, who knows? Next story is James E. Tedford. He mysteriously vanished in November of 1949. Now this story really makes me go, He boarded a bus in St. Albans, Vermont, where he had been visiting his family. He was taking the bus to Bennington, Vermont, where he lived in a retirement home. 14 passengers now saw Tedford on the bus, sleeping in a seat after the last stop before Bennington. What doesn't make sense is that when the bus arrived in Bennington, Tedford was nowhere to be seen. Now, nowhere to go either, right? All of his belongings were still on the luggage rack. What is even stranger about this case is that Tedford's wife also disappeared some years earlier when he returned home from combat because he was in World War II. And he found that his wife had vanished and their property had been abandoned. Did Tedford's wife come back to bring her husband into the next dimension with her? Stranger things have happened. Probably not, but where did the fella go? There was nowhere for him to go. That one, I would almost think, possibly could be somebody who just melted into another reality. Okay. Thelma Pauline Melton was a 58-year-old woman who disappeared while hiking with two of her friends in September of 1981. The three friends were hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains, a lot of good places to get lost there, on an easy trail, though, that Melton was very familiar with. She knew this trail. Melton was walking just a bit ahead of her companions, so she was the first to round the corner in an upcoming bend. When her friends rounded the corner, and they weren't too far behind her, she was nowhere to be seen. She just vanished. Now, Melton suffered from high blood pressure, so the possibility that she could have suddenly sprinted off is unlikely. No trace of her has ever been found. Pretty sad, huh? Here's one. Prabdeep Swan is a Canadian military reservist who disappeared on a hiking trip in Australia in May of 2013. Swan parked his rented camper and set off on the main range walk in Kosciuszko National Park, probably saying that totally wrong. A staff member called the police when he noticed that the vehicle hadn't moved for almost a week, though it had only had 24-hour parking pass on it. The bizarre part of this case is that two park rangers heard a voice that sounded like a cry for help, coming from the area where Swan had disappeared from. Despite the information, searchers could never locate him. And now this is a strange one. Martha Wright disappeared in 1975 when she and her husband, Jackson, were driving from New Jersey to New York. They were driving through a Lincoln Tunnel. The couple had to pull over because there was a lot of condensation on their car, so they were going to wipe it off. And Martha, the wife, wiped off the back windshield while her husband, Jackson, took the front. When Jackson had cleared the windshield, he looked up, and he had no wife left. She had just disappeared. There was nowhere for her to go, and no other cars had come in to take her. He would have seen it. And poof, she vanished. Now, of course, did her husband just make up the story, whack her and all that? Maybe, but that is a way far out story to say. Just to make, I mean, he could have easily said something more believable than that, if that would have been the truth. Brandon Swanson, a 19-year-old college student from Minnesota who disappeared in 2008. He was on his way, he was on a night out with his friends and ran his car into a ditch. He wasn't with his friends at the time, of course. He called his parents and asked them to pick him up. And this is where the story gets strange. Brandon told his parents his car went off the road near a town called Lind, Minnesota. And he was going to walk toward a town where his parents would pick him up. However, as his parents approached Lind, they never saw no sign of their son or his car. And they found later his car near a town called Taunton, Minnesota, but that was nowhere near where he said that his car was. And he knew the area well. And his father had been on the phone with his son for about 45 minutes, trying to locate him, when he suddenly said, "Shit." And then the line went cold. Now, authorities said that maybe it fell into a river or something, but they called him and the phone kept ringing. So if that was the case, the phone wouldn't have been ringing. And so, what do y'all think of those stories? There's so many stories to do, and I'll do more of these type of stories. What happened? Anyway, I want to wish everyone a wonderful Friday and weekend ahead, and over and